Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I'm your host, Martin, and I'm very happy to have you with me today. Have a great conversation today with Rob Bateman, also known as Adeptus Psychonautica. We had this conversation about a month ago, and I've just been holding on to it because it's been in the queue for bringing to you here on the Entheogenic Evolution, and, well, we've finally arrived at the moment to bring you this conversation. Before we get there, of course, just a few announcements. First announcement is I've been away for the past couple of weeks, and unfortunately, I do not have anyone to thank for making a contribution in support of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast over these past couple of weeks, with, of course, the exception for those individuals who are my patrons over at my patreon.com/MartinWBall page, who provide monthly support, not only for this podcast, but the other work that I do as well. So I just want to extend that thank you to my ongoing patrons over at Patreon. Have everything there from $1 a month up to $100 a month for what kind of support or access and what kind of gifts you'd like to receive. So if you want to help support me that way and help support this podcast, that's great. And of course, the one-off approach is also just to leave a PayPal donation. You can find the link to PayPal at my personal webpage, martinball.net. It's at the top right of the page. And of course, your support is always appreciated and helps keep this thing running. Let's see. Coming up next on the Entheogenic Evolution podcast, my next interview is going to be with Timothy Coe. He is the CEO of Entheon Biomedical, working on, of course, psychiatric medications with psychedelics for use in therapy. Should be an interesting conversation. Also have a number of other interviews already lined up, more than I can even mention here. So there's going to be a lot of action here on the podcast. And of course, we're still alternating with chapters from Oribai's Vision, which is almost wrapped up. We've only got a few more chapters to go there. Also in other news, if you're a friend of mine on Facebook or on Instagram, you've probably noticed that I now have in my hands the proof copy of Facilitating 5-MeO-DMT, an anthology of approaches to serving the God molecule. I have got the proof copy of the book right here, just arrived. Well, I'm not quite sure when it arrived. I was in Florida, taking lots of pictures of birds. And now that I'm back, the book is here. So now the next stage in the process is to just review the book, go through, look for any final typos or any misformattings or anything like that. And then it's going to be good to go. It's going to be ready to publish. And it'll be out probably before the end of the month. We'll see. Just need the time to get through it. But it's here. I think it looks great. I'm really happy with it and excited to be bringing it out to the world very, very shortly. Of course, I have been away, but I'm back now, so that means the doctor's office is now open once again. I'm available for 30, 60, or 90-minute consultations to help you integrate or prepare for or navigate your entheogenic experience. If you want more information, just head on over to www.nondualentheogenicintegration.com. All right, well, that's it for announcements. Let's go ahead and get into our interview with Rob Bateman. It's a wide-ranging, long conversation for you, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. We talk a little bit about Rob's history of getting into psychedelics and podcasting in his YouTube channel, Adeptus Psychonautica. Talk about DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, facilitation, ceremony, psychedelic culture, all kinds of things. Anyway, hope you enjoy. And of course, we'll be back next week with another chapter from Oribai's Vision and then Timothy Coe from Entheon Biomedical. Enjoy. Let's go ahead and let's talk about all kinds of things, Rob.
Sure, man. Let's do it.
I thought, we could talk about DMT and we could talk about 5-MeO and we can get into some online fisticuffs as you stated it. If we feel like...
I was only joking.
I know. But, I thought this would be kind of a fun opportunity just to start just by kind of getting to know you more and more about Adeptus Psychonautica. And I'll just start with a confession. Okay, you ready for this? This is heavy.
Cool.
The confession is I don't follow anybody's YouTube channel. I don't follow anybody else's podcasts. I just don't. I've got enough of my own stuff going. Plus, with my sleep disorder, it's like, what can I fit in today? So, I don't know that much about even how long you've been doing Adeptus Psychonautica or how you got started there. So I kind of wanted to start there and just kind of learn about you and about your channel and what got you started doing all of that. And I'll also mention that you came up in an article that I saw just the other day about Leo Guerra and kind of the wackiness going on over there at Leo's channel. And I was kind of reading it, I was kind of curious, I wonder who they're going to talk about. And then here's Rob from Adeptus Psychonautica talking about Leo, because I guess some people have committed suicide over there.
They've had a few I'd say in about a year. I think there's been like 3 or something like that, which I wouldn't say is like a huge amount given the size of Leo's channel and the sort of the kind of audience he attracts, but the way he reacts to these things is not great, I think. So it's my kind of. I mean, look, we can get into it anyway. We can as we talk about it.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead. Let's start with Rob. Give us some background about Rob. I know you're in Switzerland now.
Well, yeah, but you can probably hear from my voice. I'm not originally from Switzerland, so I'm originally from Manchester in the UK, and I moved to Switzerland about 8 years ago, and that was just purely with the work that I was doing. But it was a really great time in my life because things weren't going so well in England. We were having lots of problems with the house that we were living in that it was literally sinking into the ground. So we were in a bit of a trouble in England as to like, oh my God, this house we've invested all this money in is falling apart. And then this opportunity came up to move to Switzerland. So we're like, perfect, new start. Like the universe just threw us an opportunity to go and live in this like stunning postcard country where it's just, the sound of music and chocolate and hills and goats and stuff. So we were like, yeah, right, let's get out of Manchester. So we moved the entire family out here in 2014, and we absolutely love it. It was the best thing we could have done for us at that time. But it's a lot quieter than. And there's still a lot of things I miss about sort of being in like the big city of England and all the sort of like the music scene of the Northwest and like the Manchester music scene and all my friends and stuff are back there. And then to swap all that for this little tiny village we live in Switzerland. But I guess it was at the right point in my life. I'm not a spring chicken anymore, so I was kind of settling into a different mode of being. But yeah, I mean that's how I came to be in Switzerland. But in terms of all this kind of like the psychedelic part of me, then really that's just something that's come from this kind of culture I grew up in Manchester. I was taking psychedelics at a very young age. I mean, like younger than I would recommend most people to be taking, but that's the kind of just what was going on in the city that I grew up in. I think I was probably taking LSD around the time I was like sort of 12, 13 years old. Wow. And I was sort of hitting the party scene when I was like sort of, like 16, going to nightclubs like when I was 16 and stuff like that. I was quite tall, so I could pass older than I was. And so I was like taking like MDMA and stuff like that at that age. And again, I'm not saying that to sort of as a kind of big myself up. It's just, like I say, it was just a culture I grew up in. But it does mean I got exposed to a lot of these things quite early. And they did shape my first of all, my understanding of like that there are other states than my, the normal states that I, you take as a given. And it's also just expanding my curiosity because I thought, wow, if this is what's available, then, what else is available, these amazing states. And plus they were incredibly bonding states. I mean, to have someone as a kind of a teenager, a young teenager that growing up in this kind of city culture, very sort of tough guy dog eat dog culture, and then suddenly you have one of these experiences and this entire new vocabulary comes online of sort of understanding, and again this is a very young age, so very clumsy sort of understanding, but still there, of like suddenly a new way of being able to relate to people and sort of have dialogue with people about yourself and what you're going through. It was very eye-opening for me, and even more so when I came to experimenting with things like MDMA, and to suddenly be able to communicate completely sincerely with your closest friends, closest like male friends at the time, that I absolutely love these guys and that they mean the world to me, and just this kind of a true feeling of love and sort of unspoken understanding. It was just incredible experiences to have so early on. Now, again, I'm not advocating that everyone should do this, but this is only my own personal story. But it had an effect on me, and that curiosity and that sense of exploration has kind of stayed with me since. And I went through all the usual kind of phases of just recreational use of these kind of things. Certainly some points where I was bordering on just abuse of these things, but managed to sort of keep it fairly level. And it's just something that stayed with me through my life. And so now I'm about to turn 45. So it's good like 30 years of experience dabbling with these things. And it's kind of, and as different things have crossed my path, and I've kind of explored them, and that's kind of led me from the more I'd say recreational experiences. I think there was a lot of transformative and a lot of very experiences in there that were very meaningful to me, but through to sort of what's seen as like the heavyweights at the moment of the sort of the DMTs and the ayahuascas and the 5-MeOs, and all this stuff. And so I think that's included me sort of ended up traveling to places like South America to sort of sit in a lot of these traditional circles. And I've gotten throughout that, I've just gotten this kind of appreciation of all these things, and the kind of I see less of a kind of a hierarchy of these things which are better, which will probably tie into some of the things we may talk about later, but more of just that these are for want of a better phrase, like tools in the toolbox that can sort of be used to nurture and sort of expose different facets of ourselves. And in that regard, I find them all equally interesting. Although certainly acknowledging that some of them are just in terms of like the punch to the face are a lot more potent than others. But yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much me in a nutshell. Like I consider myself quite ordinary, to be honest. I'm just wife, 2 kids, middle-aged, just someone just on their own journey. I'm not sort of looking to sort of try and become a shaman or a facilitator or like a journalist or anything. I'm just really just kind of talking about my own experience, and I'm always very pleasantly surprised that anybody pays any attention to it, to be honest, because it's just me. I'm average working class person from the northwest of England, just blurting out on commenting really on what I'm going through. But I think that actually, or what I've come to appreciate, is that gives me a certain amount of freedom to be able to kind of just talk about these things in a very kind of matter-of-fact way, because I'm not necessarily trying to say what's kind of popular or to get myself in one of these sort of crowds of these very distinct tribes within the psychedelic sort of discourse. I'm not particularly interested in sort of towing the line there. I'm just commenting on things as I see them. So I guess, yeah, in that regard, I'd say a lot of what my YouTube channel is commentary. It's my journey. It's a blog. It's commentary. It's engaging with the discourse, because there's a lot of different sort of voices out there in the psychedelic culture, and I consider myself part of that psychedelic culture. So, yeah, when things arise, I'm going to sort of throw my voice in. And like I said, I never expected anyone to pay any attention to my voice, so it's a pleasant surprise that they do.
Yeah, well, it seems to be part of your appeal that you kind of do have sort of an unaffiliated, everyman sort of voice of coming in and talking about, well, what's really going on here? What's reasonable? What's rational? What can we say about this? So even though you are certainly a very seasoned psychonaut, that you come off as being just very grounded, very practical, and kind of a no nonsense approach, which I definitely really appreciate. I'm just curious if there's anything you'd want to share about your home life growing up. I'm kind of curious about, well, what kind of background that people come from. So we've got your teenage psychedelic years in Manchester, but what was your home life like?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit a bit dark, to be honest. So I'll try not to make it too morbid, but I'm certainly not trying to bum out any of your listeners. Yeah, my past is pretty grim. My mother committed suicide when I was 3 years old, and that led to me sort of a kind of a custody battle between my grandparents and my father. I ended up living with my father. He remarried. There was a lot of child abuse there. It was a very unhappy childhood. I don't, obviously, like I said, my mother passed away. I don't speak to my father anymore. And I think that's, when you put it in, when I describe it like that, it's kind of no surprise, really. You've got this kind of young man looking to escape to something different. And I certainly found that sort of, that escape within this kind of this drug culture that I talked around, and that's also why I think these experiences were so profound for me, because, like I mentioned, my upbringing was very strict. It was very abusive. It was there wasn't much of a relationship, say, between me and my father. It was a very sort of kids live in their bedroom. That's it. You come in home from school, you shut the door, you shut the fuck up. That's where you live. And so then when, that kind of shapes your whole, or my whole perception of what relationships were, what relationships with adults were, because I was kind of permanently locked into this kind of, I was the child, he was the parent. And so, yeah, I had a difficulty being able to relate to adults because I just stayed away. So then when I did start having these experiences with psychedelics, and suddenly this language comes online and this realization comes online, it's like, hey, the world isn't actually like this. In that, it was more than just a sort of a high for me. It was a revelation for me. It was kind of like, oh, this is how things are supposed to. There is actually something here. Like I can see now that there's a chance to forge relationships with sort of like my friends and with sort of other people that, yeah, my parents didn't prepare me for. And that's really kind of stayed with me. And it's been the source of a lot of the work, why I went to places like the Amazon, and why I particularly looked to do like a healing journey with ayahuasca. And it was just because I got to sort of, my sort of mid-30s, and as we were discussing just earlier, this is when my sort of anxieties stuff really kicked in, and I realized this was all relating to my mother's suicide, and this was just stuff that I just had to bury, because when you're a 3-year-old kid, you just have to, how does a 3-year-old kid deal with its mother committing suicide? You have to put emotional firewalls in place pretty quick, and that sort of it gives you a sense of strength. Certainly it gives you enough to get through, your early years. But then as I hit sort of like middle age, and I got kids of my own, I realized I was just so emotionally blocked. I didn't want to be that person anymore. I knew I needed to do something. So that's really how I got into the kind of the plant medicines. What I consider like not the recreational stuff, more the medicinal stuff. At that point. That was my transition. And so I'd say that was about sort of 10 years ago, and this is kind of what led me through this path, which got me into ayahuasca. And I've been on this healing journey with ayahuasca, which I would say only really resolved last September when I did my last trip out to the Amazon, and which to me really ties into these things of like one of the misconceptions I think around these medicines of them as a kind of like a silver bullet. 1 cup of ayahuasca. This is what you're reading like, and all like the magazines at the moment. You've got these problems. You drink 1 cup of ayahuasca, and you're absolutely, it all goes. You throw up a few times, and then all your problems disappear. Like, no, I've been going out there for like 5 years, and it took a lot of processing. Even to, I remember in my early ceremonies, it was kind of saying like, I was like, okay, let me resolve my mommy issues basically. And it was like, yeah, no, dude, let's start at the beginning. You don't even know what a mother is. Let's start there. Let's start with what this, the maternal concept before we can start talking about you. So I was having to go through this, understanding, what my mother was, who she was, what might have led her to making these, like how could somebody make these kind of decisions, understanding my own kind of pain as this kind of child just abandoned, and understanding that what I was feeling, this grief and abandonment and anger and loneliness, this was not like a pathology. This was something I needed to work through. This is kind of normal, but I just bottled it up so far down that I just didn't even have the tools to get it up, and I needed to basically have my ass kicked to get it up. So it's been a long sort of journey with that, but I feel like last September, a lot of these pieces really clicked into place, and I don't want to be too cocky about it, which I think I might have earned after 5 years of repeated trips to the Amazon, but it does, it does feel like I've, I don't like to use the word resolved, but I feel more like I've moved past it, but sort of not ignoring it. So like that, what happened to me is there, and I feel like I've kind of healed around it and sort of moving out. I realize that it's a bit nebulous to describe it that way, but it's been a long journey with these medicines. But so I still do things like recreation. I still find immense joy and awe and wonder in these medicines, but I've had like several different paths going on at the same time. And I'd say the YouTube channel really came around as a way to document, in particular, this last part, the part that I've just described, this healing journey. And really, it wasn't even my intention to kind of document that in any way. It's just that I was on these retreats and I was doing what everybody does on these retreats. So I was doing what you were doing in Maui. I was taking pictures. I was taking lots of videos that I would never use. And I got to the end of the retreat and they gave us a kind of a pep talk. And one of the things they said was like, as you try and sort of shake off your bad habits, replace them with good habits. So replace them with creative habits. And I was like, okay, well, what can I do that's creative? I used to do a bit of music when I was younger. Am I going to get back into that? I used to do a bit of painting. And then I kind of put two and two together, that I'd been capturing all this footage on my phone and all this, I've been making videos walking around and of me talking, commenting on what I was doing. And it just seemed, all right, I'll make a YouTube video. I'll put some of this stuff out there as like blogs or vlogs. And one of the first things I did was just to do reviews of the ayahuasca retreats I'd been on. So I kind of thought there was a bit of a gap there, in that, with particularly something like an ayahuasca retreat, which they can be quite expensive. You don't really necessarily know what you're getting until you're sort of out there. Some of these places might be brilliant, some of these places might be absolute shitholes. So I figured, and by that point I'd been to about 5 different places, and I thought, well, I'll do like objective reviews of these places, because I felt like there were some people who had difficulty separating out the medicine experience from the actual experience of the place itself. So you could go to somewhere which is like really basic and have like the absolute best medicine experience ever. And likewise, you could go to the most luxurious air-conditioned swimming pool place ever and have a really shitty medicine experience. But those things aren't connected. The place itself might be fine, the staff might be fine and friendly and stuff. But it's, if someone has a bad experience with the medicine, then you sort of read reviews about people saying, "Oh, this species, the shaman were obviously just brujos and all this. They're all out to get me." It's like, oh, maybe you just had a bad trip. Maybe you just had a bad time. And likewise, you could have places where, quite cowboyish places, but because someone had a good experience, like, I'm not going to hear you say a bad word about these places. This medicine's the best thing. I said, yeah, the medicine's the best thing ever, but the place is actually, these guys are jokers. So I started doing kind of like objective retreat reviews of just kind of like, breaking places down by, how good the place was, how good the facilities was, how friendly the staff were. And I think that was the thing that really sort of first attracted people on my channel, was these very sort of objective retreat reviews. And then from there, I kind of branched out a bit more into more like the blog stuff and the commentary stuff. And people would send me things like, what do you think about this? And yeah, particularly some of the stranger ideas that are out there in the psychedelic culture, I just could not, sometimes just can't keep myself quiet. It's just there's just too much in there to like, oh, come on, I can't be the only one seeing this. Let's talk through it, guys. So yeah, I think that's pretty much how the channel came about.
Yeah, well, I like how your story kind of has some very strong sort of common elements that I see a lot, in my own integration and consultations that I do with people. But so just to point out a few things that I think are not necessarily, I wouldn't call them stereotypical, but certainly they show up enough that there's some commonalities there. One is some kind of childhood trauma that really doesn't reach the place of arriving for some kind of resolution until some point in the later years or middle age, or, often like mid-30s is kind of a strong turning point for a lot of people, and especially for men. And something that you described there about how you kind of bottled up your emotions because that's the way you could deal with the trauma of your mom committing suicide. And that's just something that shows up with so many men. Like, certainly you get a lot of men that are very easy at expressing anger. But when it gets into other emotions, I mean, it's interesting having conversations with people and, consulting with them and, trying to tap into what's going on with them. And they're like, well, I just don't even feel anything. And that's what turned me to psychedelic medicine. So that's a very common theme, and especially among men. And then also this idea that your world was kind of opened up through the recreational use. Like for me as a teenager, it was cannabis. That was the turn on for me. It was like, okay, everything I've been told about cannabis is just total bullshit. It's a complete lie. This is fucking awesome. I have no interest in drinking, but man, pass me the joint because this is just too great. And then the social bonding that I experienced there and the enjoyment of like art and music and nature. So then we have the social side and the recreational use, which, in a lot of circles in the modern psychedelic world is kind of poo-pooed. It's all this like, oh, you fucking got to take it seriously. This is all sacred. You got to pray. You got to have ceremony. And that's something that is like universally always turned me off. I am not on that side of the fence at all. But I also am about now this transition from the social use into then the ayahuasca, of this intentional idea of, look, I'm going to investigate this so that I can work on this. And that's an important transition for a lot of people, that they might have had a prior relationship with psychedelics, but now they're like, well, actually, I'm looking to uncover this. And it's interesting how you can take psychedelics or mind-altering substances for years and never get into that it actually does take, in most cases, it takes some kind of intention that I'm going to look at this now, and then it changes. Sometimes that comes sort of more forcefully for some people, where they're like, well, I was just looking to have a good time on mushrooms, but all of a sudden all this content of my mother came up, so that happens as well. But I do think that the intentional transition is important for a lot of people. And then what you emphasize there, which I always emphasize with people, is that I don't care what psychedelic you're working with. There are no magic bullets out there. There is no psychedelic that is simply going to solve your problems or going to make your life better, but that it's often grueling, difficult, and challenging work. And it takes a certain level of courage and willingness to kind of go through the ringer that they can put you through. And that this healing process and transformation process is definitely not all love, light, fairies, and bells and whistles. That sometimes it's dark, it's grueling, it's turning you inside out physically in your psyche and your emotions. But that when you do that, you do reach a point where you are more resilient and you are more open and you are able to change your behaviors. And then also another one that I'm always encouraging people is find some expressive outlet, whether it be dance or painting or music or writing or creating a video blog or whatever it is that you're going to do. And what I always tell people, the biggest hurdle is just starting. So just go out and do it. And then that opens up new possibilities for you. So it's kind of like you're encapsulating all of these things and then coming back with sort of this curious rationalist approach to then talking about psychedelic culture and psychedelic healing. So I think you're a great example of all of these sort of topics.
I just want to just come back to what you were saying just at the beginning, where we were talking about how there is this kind of snobby attitude around these psychedelics should only be done in this kind of like ceremonial way, and it's not spiritual. And I just think that is just such bullshit, because that this idea of what is spiritual, I think it gets lost very easily, because I think there is nothing more spiritual than say if me and my wife take sort of mushrooms and recreationally, then we're sort of dancing and laughing and just staring into each other's eyes and telling each other that we just love each other, and you're completely bonded, and your boundaries are just completely dissolving, and it's amazing, and it's this moment of just there is nothing more spiritual than that. But it is recreational. I mean, we would there's nothing unspiritual about having like an awesome time and just being reminded of how awesome life is, and how how beautiful existence can be with the people that you love the most, with this new vocabulary coming on. And it just pisses me right off when people like just put all this stuff out. And again, this is something from someone who loves the traditional frameworks, but it's not the be all and end all. It's like this whole thing of if you don't do everything's got to be done with a shaman, everything's got to be done with this, and there's always got to be leaf rattles and stuff. It's like, no, I think it's kind of missing the point, or at least a very blinkered view of it. So that's kind of one of the things I try and straddle on my channel, because I am, just by the nature of who I am, this kind of rational, logical, when I'm hearing something, I'm always trying okay, let's work out what the process is here. Mm-hmm. And so, that's kind of useful for kind of like cutting through a lot of woo-woo and cutting through a lot of bullshit. But then it's also, it's amazing to be able to sort of like give all that up and just go and straddle, just dip in the other end and just immerse yourself in some kind of bonkers, psychedelic culture where it's, you're out in the middle of the Amazon stuff. So I think these things, I don't see any sort of major contradiction between these things, particularly with something like psychedelics, where, the experience in itself is just so ineffable that at some point you just have to kind of submit to poetry and just to awe. But yeah, I mean that kind of this kind of the tribalism of like, got to do it this way or got to do it this way. I mean, I can't complain too much, because this is a lot of sort of me talking about stuff like this is what's given my channel a lot of attention, because it gives me a lot of kind of room to sort of unpack some of where I think these people have kind of got lost in a bit in their own kind of indulgences, I should say.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of a line that I used to use back in like 2008 and 2009 that I was first experiencing 5-MeO, and one of the lines was "enlighten up." That this idea that it's all got to be super serious, and I think it fundamentally overlooks such a crucial part of not just the human experience, but I would say the mammalian experience in general. Mm-hmm. That if we look at mammals, which are the most intelligent beings on the planet, pretty much all mammals, anything beyond like rodents, I don't know how much rodents really play, but everything beyond rodents, we see that mammals learn by play and by having a good time. And the more extended the adolescent period is, the actual more learning that takes place. And it's all through play. And that I think psychedelics are a great avenue to experience high levels of human play.
Yeah. I mean, the playfulness is it just sticks out of these things. I mean, but just on that, we talk about when you're observing that play in animals, it's so recognizable as well. It's not just it's so endearing. You instantly feel that connection. Like probably with like you see with yourself and the whales sort of slapping the fins. You just feel the joy just radiates out, and you recognize that sort of play. And yeah, it is. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's something very intrinsic to whether it's to mammals or to life. And so to sort of to put like walls of seriousness and sort of dogma in front of it is I've no time for that at all.
Yeah. But then there's the place for, especially if you are agreeing to attend. Say you're going to a Santo Daime ceremony or an ayahuasca ceremony or a Native American church ceremony, that then there is sort of the social agreement that, okay, I'm going to play by the rules here.
Absolutely,
and whatever your priorities are for making this serious, that I'm going to engage in that for this time period. And that can provide the mindset for people then, because there can be the hedonist side of, I'm just only looking for play. I'm only looking for the good time. And, and that, if we put that into a spiritual context, then we're getting into like quote unquote spiritual bypassing, right? I only want the bliss, but there is a time for the rigor and the determination and sort of the grueling nature that you can experience on psychedelics. But I'm in total agreement with you that I think that there's room for all of it. And even
I think it's ritual. I mean that's what I think you would describe it. I think there's the play element is one part, but the ritual part and the sort of the as I mean like the commitment part is another thing. And I'm a big fan of ritual. I mean, this is one of the things that does take me to doing these kind of ceremonies in the jungle, because I think that signaling to yourself of that kind of, okay, I am here to do this. I have got a mindset. I have got an intention. I know where I'm sort of going with this. I'm ready to face the mountain, and I realize I might be in for like a very tough night here. Pretty much definitely in for a tough night. But and that kind of, I think that sort of signaling to yourself, I think is profoundly important. And that's what I mean. I think it's the more balanced way is to straddle both of these places and recognize the sort of the value in each, rather than getting sort of too tribal about it always has to be like this, or like, oh no, that ritual's all bullshit, there's nothing there, it's just there's nothing in this at all, or no you must only be like this. It's like, no guys, there's some balance here somewhere. Let's look for the value in each thing.
Yeah, well, even at the sort of the cognitive performative level, human beings, like most complex social animals, much of our behavior is performative in nature, meaning that there are roles that we play, and the actions and the words that we engage in, they are performing something in order to communicate our status and our social relationship. And so we are, in a sense, we are cognitively wired to respond to things like ritual, whether it's just something as simple as wishing somebody happy birthday, or asking them how they're doing today, or, hey, we've got this incredibly powerful sacrament and we're going to surrender to it and we're going to talk to it and pray to it and have this event. That these are kind of cues that help us navigate emotionally and psychologically the world that we're engaged in, so that it definitely does play an important role. And I've had my share of ceremonial experiences, and it ultimately, for me, that was not the way that I wanted to practice, because I'm not a ritualist. I was for a while, I went through my ritualized time period and sort of self-identified mushroom shamanism, salvia divinorum shamanism that I was engaged in, and then eventually just left that for what I just considered a pure energetic model of behavior. But that doesn't mean that there isn't room for ceremony. And it just, for me personally, it's what I decided, I'm not really interested in that. But there are times where, again, when I'm doing consultations with people and maybe they've been working with somebody one-on-one, and I might actually recommend, well, I think it'd be great for you to go to an ayahuasca retreat center and have that experience and have that group experience and have that structured experience, that it definitely can serve people. So again, I think that there's room for all of these things. And there's also just room for taking psychedelics on your own and just having a very interesting time, because it is very interesting.
It certainly is. It's very interesting indeed. But can I just ask, I mean, with your own sort of practice, would you say that was kind of like devoid of ritual? Or because it certainly seemed to me like it was your own kind of ritual. I think maybe we could sort of get into what ritual actually means, but it certainly, from what I've seen of your practice, had the feel of a kind of ceremony to it. Or would you sort of say it's something different, or what's the line there?
Yeah, so for me now, and this is the thing that came up in one of our recent email exchanges, is that first of all, you got to remember that I have my background, my PhD is in religious studies. And so when I got my PhD degree, I had to take several different tests in different areas. So my areas were philosophy and history of science and religion. That was one test. It had a huge stack of books for reading. Another area was in oral traditions and mythology. So that was another area. Then another was, broadly speaking, just Native American religions and cultural spiritualities and traditions. So that was another stack. And then another area, which was actually under a professor who specialized in Taoism, was ritual, sacred space, and the body. And so I come from a pretty strict academic background about what defines ritual. And so here is, now I've been laid off from SOU, where I was teaching religious studies because of the coronavirus pandemic. They don't have a religious studies department. So when enrollment dropped and they had to cut classes, mine were the first to go, because there is no religious studies program. But the definition that I used to give my students of ritual is special things done by special people in special places and special times for special purposes. I said, this is my hardcore academic thing. I said, so for example, if you're in a swimming pool and you take some kid and you grab him by the head and you dunk him under the water, you've just been an asshole because you dunked someone. But if you're in the church and if you're wearing the right robes and if you've said the right words and the people have arrived for the right purpose, then you can take someone and you can dunk them underwater and say, hey, you're born again. Okay, so it's this whole idea of specialness, and that it usually involves specific body actions, specific performative events, such as the dunking, that's the performative nature, and also the saying of the prayers, that's the performative nature, and usually the transformation of symbolic forms. So if you've gone from a state of being unsaved or uncleansed to now being saved and cleansed. And often, not always, but many rituals also make at least symbolic reference to various forms of mythology or metaphysical or mythological constructs that exist within the culture. So if we're using that definition for ritual, then what I was doing didn't have any of that.
Okay.
Now, if we're saying, look, this is a special event, someone's coming for this, and this is special, it's not ordinary, and that it might be potentially transformative for them, and that there are certain roles that need to be played, that here's me as the facilitator, here's you as the client, then that would be something ritualistic. But I liked to describe it as, look, what we're doing here is what I would just call energy work. And even in using energy, that I don't like to use, like a lot of people in the 5-MeO world, they like to use the non-duality that comes from Buddhism and Hinduism and use sort of different meditative states and samadhi and talk about, chakras or things like that. And for me, it's like, look, I see myself more as a technician, that what we're going for is we want a fully functioning system. And if I sense or feel that there's something that's not functioning up to capacity here, then I'm going to help you address that, and we're going to work on it. And also, people would ask me afterwards, like, well, what did you see when you were working on me and you were making those noises? And I would always just tell them, look, it's just energy. And they would want like, oh, well, I saw these spirits, and so I'm working with these different entities, and we've accomplished this, we've cleansed your karma. And I was like, look, it's like asking someone, if your toilet's clogged and someone unclogs it, and then you're like focusing on like, well, who did that? What did they have to eat that day? Why was that, so cloggy like that? And it's like, look, I'm just here to help things flush out. So, it did have certain elements that we could identify as sort of ritual in nature, but also, sometimes people would come and they'd want to like create a little altar and call to their spirit guides or whatever. And I would just tell them no. I said, sorry, no, we're not doing that here, because what we're doing is we're directly dealing with whatever energy arises right here, right now. And even I had times where people would start singing Santo Daime hymns or even start singing Icaros, and I would usually stop them because I would say, look, you're bringing that in from another tradition, and this is not what we're doing here. So I think we could call it ritual really loosely, but I would call it more of sort of a tune-up kind of session,
I'm sort of picturing you in your overalls, sort of like working on a car, like, bring somebody in for a service, like, there you go, that'll be that'll be $50. I'll have it ready next Tuesday.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it was. And then, afterwards, people would be just like, my God, that was amazing. How did you do that? What's going on here? And I would just say, look, it's just another day in the office for me. Okay, it's just another day in the office. I know it blew your mind, but it's just another day in the office. So I had a very practical sort of approach to it. And that was, in strong contrast that I was introduced to 5-MeO DMT in a highly ritualized context, where I'm talking about there'd be like 2 hours of ritual before anyone's even served, and then each person is served in this very ritualized way, and that would take another 5 hours, and then there'd be another 2 hours of ceremony afterwards. And for me, I was kind of like, okay, this was great the first time, but
let's cut to the point here.
Yeah. So I try to develop just what I considered a very practical approach. And, through my own experiences with psychedelics, that I definitely went through a period where I identified as being spiritual about it and being a spiritual seeker. And, through my graduate work at the Mescalero Apache tribe, I was initiated by some of their medicine people and given permission to use different medicine symbolism and medicine objects to use in ritual and serving people. And I did that for a while. But then once I really opened up with 5-MeO, I was just like, I'm just going to cut right to the chase. I'm just going to be as direct as possible.
And do you know what? I actually really like that about you, Matt. I think it's one of the reasons we got on, because I think you also have a very transparent and very honest and very sort of blunt nature, and I think I've certainly heard people sort of complain about that, because you know your approach and you stand by your approach, and you just kind of put it out there. And then you'll get people saying, "Oh, Martin Ball, he thinks he knows this." And I didn't necessarily get that impression from your stuff. So I read your book, Entheogenic Liberation, and I just as with like the passage that you recently put on Facebook from your new book, there's a lot there. It's not that I disagree with your stuff. I've just got I've got my own sort of ideas of it stuff, but I certainly respect and find a lot to agree with in the way that you set things out. And I think, I imagine that you probably butt heads with some of these people in the same way that I do, because you're not necessarily, completely towing the line that, it's all got to be over here, or it's all got to be over here. There's, so yeah, I mean, did you find that a lot with that sort of people sort of clash with the stuff that you've been sort of talking about?
I would say less so today, but certainly extremely it was the case back in 2008 and 2009 when I was first experiencing 5-MeO, and then really developing what developed into my own sort of worldview that wasn't based on anything, was just based on my own experience. And this is part of the introduction to the new book that you didn't get to see from the section that I posted on Facebook, but that back in 2008 and 2009, when I first started talking about 5-MeO, everyone responded with, "You mean DMT? No, you mean DMT, right? No, you're talking about DMT." Right. And so, like,
goddamn fool doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. So, and also, I really quickly, one of the big places that I got a lot of pushback is that I really quickly found from my experiences that, look, I don't think I agree with pretty much anything Terence McKenna says. That I really find that a lot of this is just kind of nonsense to me. And so I started talking about it that way. And so, I mean, I even got death
Do you mean
threats.
specifically like the DMT stuff, or do you mean like all the Terence McKenna stuff in general? Or
Well, specifically around DMT, that people would write me saying, well, Terence McKenna said 5-MeO is just a feeling, but DMT is like the shit, and so you don't know what the fuck you're talking about." And then I also started writing about and talking about, and says, "Yeah," and so Terence is talking about this whole 2012 thing, and UFOs made out of translinguistic matter, and the transcendental object at the end of time, and that the DMT is always about the machine elves, and and I had people writing me saying, "Well, I've tried DMT and I've never seen a machine elf. What am I doing wrong?" And so I'm telling them, it's like, look, that's just Terrence's thing, okay? He's into machine elves, but I view it as a projection that he's creating. And I know that other people experience quote unquote machine elves, but that doesn't change my mind that it's
I
projection.
hate that goddamn phrase. I absolutely hate it.
Yeah, so that's where I received a whole lot of pushback initially. And I had people posting online like, "I'm a charlatan, I'm a fraud." And then, as I was really getting into the 5-MeO, I had people saying like, "Oh, Martin Ball is the Antichrist," because, I was coming out and saying, "Look, here's a direct path to the ultimate state of being, and you don't need to be religious, you don't need to be spiritual, and actually a lot of this stuff is just a distraction anyway." So yeah, I got called all kinds of names, and now at this point, especially with my approach to 5-MeO, even though it's different than a lot of other people that are out there, I do think that it's more widely appreciated as being sort of a neutral presentation on 5-MeO that isn't couched in, oh, it's all about the toad, or it's all about the ceremony, or it's all about this or that, but just kind of just really trying to present as neutrally as I can, even though I'm also passionate and I'm enthusiastic, and I am, a cheerleader for 5-MeO. There's no doubt about that. And even that is sometimes misconstrued that I'm some kind of 5-MeO elitist. But I always like to say, look, I've never met a psychedelic that I didn't like. I mean, the only one that I wasn't really that impressed with was like 2CE or something like that, where I just felt like a fuzzy pincushion, which just wasn't all that interesting to me. But I actually support the use of all psychedelics. I think that they all have their place, that they're all very interesting, and I don't have anything against them. But I do think that there is something special about 5-MeO. And so, yeah, I've received all kinds of crazy pushback all along the way, but I'd actually say it's less now, with the exception of just that shit show that Symposia created. Like a couple months ago, somebody tagged me on Facebook, this guy who's calling himself, what was it, like shamanic whistleblower, and he made this post saying, "We are looking for reports from people who have experienced lasting psychological damage from Martin Ball, who is a internationally known author and also a psychopath. Yes, the two can exist in the same body at once." And I just wrote on this post as like, Rob and I talked about all this on Adeptus Psychonautica. You might want to check it out. And then the person came back. The person came back with, "Oh, thank you so much." I was like, you just called me a psychopath and now you're thanking me? I mean, can we just have like a regular conversation? We have to call people names.
I mean, just come back to what you said at the beginning with the bit that's missing from what I didn't see in the Facebook. And I must say, I from the part that you posted on Facebook, I really enjoyed it. So I'm really looking forward to reading your new book. But yeah, I can imagine that sort of context of people sort of giving you shit over DMT, putting Terence McKenna on a pedestal. It explains a lot why you felt the need to sort of put that out there as around the difference between these two things. I'm a bit intrigued because I mean, knowing the little bit that I know about you, of your say your musical interests and your writing interests. Because I know you've written fiction books as well as non-fiction, which does indicate this kind of storytelling sort of love of the narrative unfolding. So I'm surprised that you kind of, I don't know, that you don't seem to celebrate that as much in something like DMT, because to me that is purely what it is. It's just this pure storytelling, and that's kind of why I love it so much. It's this kind of just this boundless novelty, and I realize that can be also like manifested just like random garbage and just absolute nonsense. But I think some of the experiences in there are, it reminds me very much of being a kid watching The Empire Strikes Back and just thinking, wow, this is possible. Giant robot dogs blowing up ice planets is possible, And so, does it not like sort of stimulate that sort of narrative part of you?
Well, it definitely does. But see, this goes back to one of the critiques that I've had of religion in general is that this is something that I used to share with my students. I used to enjoy shocking them in my own way in the classroom, but I would just tell people, I said, look, we now in the modern world, we have this category, or we have these categories that we call science fiction and fantasy. And we understand that there's stories. And in these stories, we actually can learn a lot about ourselves. We can represent ideas of good versus evil, about transformative experience. We can look at all these narrative elements, but we understand that it's fiction. And I said, but if we go back into the ancient world, what we get is that there is no such genre distinction. And so that then, especially now in the modern world, like if we look at Christianity, for example, as a historical religion, it really wasn't until modern America that people started to say that the Bible should be taken literally. So as we have developed science fiction and fantasy and these other genres of storytelling, that now it's like, no, this one is literally true. And I said, that's where I take issue, is when people take stories and then want to say that they're literally true. And that's one of my big critiques of Terence McKenna, that out of his mushroom and DMT experiences, he created this whole mythology around 2012 that to me was like, this is just goofy nonsense. This is fun. These ideas are neat. His storytelling ability is obviously excellent. He's very good at engaging the audience and in sharing these elements. But then when we turn around and say, and so history's going to end in 2012.
Is this the Time Wave Zero stuff?
Yeah.
That was bonkers.
Yeah.
Not in a good way.
Yeah, and that's where I take issue with it. It said when we mistake the story for reality, and this is also where my own sense of non-duality comes in, that it was from the non-dual experience of 5-MeO, of this experience of absolute unity and oneness, where there is no subject and object, that then it changed my relationship to what I perceived within my psychedelic experiences. Because rather than it's like, oh my God, I might be somewhere on another planet, and look, here's these highly intelligent, half humanoid, half AI beings that I'm interacting with. It went from, wow, maybe I'm really experiencing all of these things, to, oh, these are all just manifestations of myself. These are projections that I'm interacting with. So it changed my understanding of it. But it has not in any way diminished my love of story. That I really enjoy writing fiction, and pretty much the only thing I read is fantasy and sci-fi. And the more epic it is, the better. Like I just started book 5 of The Wheel of Time, is what I'm reading right now. So I love these elements. I love fantastical elements. I love being told a good story. I love taking psychedelics and watching a good fantasy or science fiction movie. That for me, that's the fun way to explore it. So I'm all for it. But where I get my own cautionary nature is when people start describing that then as objectively real or as objectively meaningful. And then when people base their decisions off of that and maybe even use that as an excuse for why they're doing what they're doing. It's like, well, I saw this in a vision and the spirits gave this to me, so I've got to do that. That's where I usually say, oh, I think you're not taking personal responsibility. So I actually do love the story element.
Yeah. I mean, I would completely agree with that. And I think that's also where have clashed with, some people in the sort of psychedelic space, in particular sort of Leo Gura, because I find he in particular, he does do that a lot. He takes things on face value of, this has been revealed to me, so therefore I'm just going to sort of parrot it out. And I'm like, whoa, dude, maybe you want to, think about this, about, process, do the work on this a little bit. Don't just, we've all had the experiences of, something grandiose, but you don't just blurt it out on YouTube 3 days later. Just let it sit for a bit and see how you feel about it. And I find that very sort of cheap in a way, very, very sort of juvenile. That kind of not sort of doing, because I like, particularly even with something like DMT, where you have these sort of epic sci-fi AI narratives. And I can, I like to sit there and sort of pull it apart and say, like, what does this actually like mean? What does this mean in relation to me and how I feel about my sort of place in the universe? And, that sense of awe and wonder, that sort of childhood sense, and I think you could tie this back into a lot of my own childhood and stuff that was perhaps, missing there, and so filling a sort of a gap. But still, I love interrogating those kind of experiences and just finding something in there, and that's why I do like the DMT experience, and I do think they can be extremely profound and extremely, I've had some very deep insights in there, particularly when we lean more towards the ayahuasca stuff. But still, even like the vape DMT experiences, but also appreciating as well that there's some of them are just kind of absolute bonkers flights of sort of fantasy, but I just kind of, like I said earlier, I think there's a place for all these experiences. So I always I try and balance it, but I do appreciate. I also kind of like enjoy the storytelling aspects. That's another kind of thing. What I enjoy doing on my channel is trying to recreate some of these experiences, and I do so in sort of very silly kind of, just sort of playing with my editing tools of whatever sort of special effects I can cook up on my computer, and just trying to recreate the impossible nature of recreating these experiences. But I'm going to give it a go anyway, because I just love the storytelling aspect, and I love kind of trying to find the poetry to come anywhere close to, even hinting at what these experiences are, and even then it would have to be somebody who understands them, because it's just so nebulous and so out there. But I find those DMT experiences a lot of fun to just to sort of weave story around and communicate and weave story back to myself, even just to kind of to understand them. So I think there is a lot of value in there, but I think there's value, like I say, in all these things. And I try to sort of talk people down out of sort of putting all their eggs in one basket. And I have noticed, I'm not saying that this is something that you're guilty of, Martin, but I think there might be an element of this, because it is a bit of a flavour of the month around sort of 5-MeO, flavour of the month, probably flavour of the decade, yeah. Sort of 5-MeO DMT. But I've seen a lot of people go like all in with it, and I don't know. I don't know whether it's just my own kind of bias there, but I think the kind of, it seems that people can go a lot further out of whack on 5-MeO DMT than they can with other things. And again, that might be unfair, but maybe it's just some of the people who I think have gone out of whack have prominent voices. So I mean, there's a couple here we could sort of talk about. There's the Octavio Rettigs, sort of the Jerry Sandoval's, the Leo Gurus. These are people who've sort of done this a lot and have a lot there, I think, that we could sort of question about the conclusions that they've come to from these things. So I don't know, do you think that sort of 5-MeO has like a bigger kind of risk factor there, or is it just that it is the kind of flavour of the month, do you think?
Oh, I think that it probably does, because it is such a powerful non-dual agent that, something that I talk about like with mushrooms or ayahuasca, which again, I love. I have total respect for those medicines. There you are more likely to be engaged in duality, meaning that you're still some kind of subject that is perceiving various objects and interacting with various others. And so there is storytelling, there's symbology that takes place there, and there's transition from one scene to the next. And people go through a lot. And they might, within a 6-hour journey, they might catch just a little glimpse of like, oh shit, maybe I'm God. And then boom, they tend to come back down.
That's all you need, though. You only need that a second.
But see, even there, then a lot of people come back questioning that with, say, ayahuasca or with mushrooms, versus with 5-MeO, it's something that can take you to that realization within a matter of seconds. So I do think that there's a greater propensity for, say, some kind of messianic complex that can develop from that. So I do think that there's a greater potential there, and that, another common thing that people describe from their 5-MeO experiences that they don't really tend to describe from ayahuasca or mushrooms or other things is they say, and man, I was enlightened. I was fully enlightened. And so there is that sense in the experience of like, wow, this is it, and I now know everything. And then even that causes problems, because some people then they fall back down from that, and they're like, well, shit, where did it go? I was just enlightened. How could I be back in the ego and the meat suit now? Or then, people wear it as like a badge of pride. Like, yeah, I've been enlightened now. And this is where, in my own course correction that I've tried to make for people is I always say, look, I don't care how many experiences you have like that. If you're not actually learning how to embody yourself in an authentic way and kind of go through the process of transformation that takes, I don't give a shit how many times you've gone big with 5-MeO. It makes no difference. You can have hundreds of those. But if you're not learning how to just be yourself, not as the Messiah, not as the enlightened master, but just purely as yourself, then you're totally missing the point. And then, I myself, like I started off saying that, I get a lot of comments from people on Leo Guerra's channel. I actually have an outstanding email that somebody wants me to respond to about absolute solipsism and discussions that they're having over there. And I've done consultations with many people who follow Leo's channel. But the thing is, I don't watch any of his videos. I'm not participating in the forums or anything like that. But often what I do get when in talking to people is I say, well, look, if you want my advice, it's stop listening to Leo and just pay attention to yourself.
Yeah.
And that I think actually that there's almost too much intellectualization that's going on without really addressing the embodiment nature of being. So it's getting into this very idealized solipsistic state. I'm the only one exists. Everyone else is just a projection of me. Nothing means anything. And that's just a complete override of our embodied humanity. It's like, look, we're all human beings. We all are actually here. You are not all just figments of my imagination. Reality is not a dream. It has elements that are similar to dreams, but reality is not a dream. Because in a dream, if I get my hand cut off, when I wake up, I'm totally fine. In reality, if I get my hand cut off, I'm fucked because I no longer have a hand. And it's going to be that way the rest of my life. So reality is not a dream. So I do think that 5-MeO, because it goes into this, for many people, sort of this deeply disembodied universal state of it's just like it's all one and I can't even sense my body. I think it lends it towards this idealism of consciousness and viewing everything as a projection. And then people start to check out from reality. And then also there is an avoidance of the responsibility of being human. And even the idea, I think, that we've seen in some facilitators is, well, if I could just blow everybody's mind, that's all I need to do. I don't need to care for them as a human being. I don't need to supervise them physically to make sure that they're not dunking themselves in the ocean while they're on 5-MeO, that we actually have to attend to the physical body and to the physical person and then help them integrate that. And so I do think that 5-MeO lends itself to these kinds of problems. And it can also lend itself to the idea that, oh, it's the only thing that I need to do. And this is another one that people come back and they ask me, they're like, well, how many times have you done 5-MeO DMT? And I tell them, look, when it comes to me personally, I took it maybe 10 times. When it came to working with clients, I did it hundreds of times because I was working with people. But that's totally different than me taking it myself. And then what surprises some people is I said, yeah, and in between me taking 5-MeO, I was going to the Santo Daime church and drinking lots of ayahuasca, and I was also working on my own and with my wife with Salvia divinorum, and I was also working with mushrooms. So it wasn't just 5-MeO is the only thing that I'm using for my own personal transformation. And, it also is one of these medicines where it's interesting because it can be very grueling and it can be very traumatic, but for many people, it also has the sense of being very easy and almost effortless that sometimes people say, yeah, that's all I ever want to do anymore
Yeah.
is
It's
5-MeO.
it's a yeah, it's a I think the thing I noticed particularly around 5-MeO is it seems very surgical. I think it's very yeah. So I'm not trying to be like flippant, but it's very like what it does is like this. I mean, it does this to the like nth degree,
Yeah.
but it's like it's fairly predictable in what at least it certainly is for me, and it is what it delivers is just so potent and so yeah, this feeling of sort of total unity of this the whole sort of non-dual experience that I've got a lot of empathy for people who are just carried away by this experience because I mean we don't get to choose what we believe. Something happens to you, you can't unbelieve it, you can't
Yeah.
unexperience it, and so if you're kind of predisposed to that, then yeah, I mean it's just solved every fucking problem in the world because you are the only important being in the universe, and so everything is just you, and it's a license to basically act like anything because you are God. It's all everything is just an extension of you, and you can just get away with some very bizarre ideas, and that's one of the things I wouldn't say that I find disturbing about it because I love this, that experience. I'm just as passionate about it as well, almost as passionate as you perhaps would say. But I must say I do find that sort of a kind of a weird phenomenon that comes out of it, which does seem I don't know. Like I said, maybe this is just my bias to it, but there just seems to be so much more energy and confidence and conviction behind when someone goes off the rails with 5-MeO, which I find very hard to sort of talk someone down from compared to say so if someone had the same experiences on mushrooms or ayahuasca. I find it's much easier to sort of ground them there, even if they're sort of going through a very turbulent state. Whereas I think once you're locked in, if you accept that 5-MeO experience on face value, and just like without any kind of like any integration, any sort of exploration of what that sort of means to you, then I think it just seems like there's a lot more risk there. But yeah, I'm just thinking out loud now.
No, but I think that you're correct. And that's part of what I would identify as sort of ego conflation,
Yeah.
where, and that's why I always like to, when I tell people, look, I'm God, because I know this because I've experienced it on 5-MeO, that I always add in, and that means you are too, and so is the other person, and so is the computer, and so is this moment. But we get into this problem when people are like, yeah, oh, it's me. Oh, it's me. And they
Yeah.
identify that with the ego, with the person that they
Mm-hmm.
are. And therefore, anything I do is excused because you're all just projections of my mind anyway. So it does make this divide between the personal and the universal. It can make it very difficult to disentangle for people. And especially if people are operating without any kind of checks and balances from other people, whether it be their significant other or from their kids or from their community or whatever it may be, that then it's very easy for those sort of those solo practitioners or solo experiencers out there. You can really easily fall into that, like, oh, it's
Yeah.
all me, it's all me. And so having the opportunity to then go into another context, I think could be very important. And like you say, that some people that they fall into, oh, it's only going to be 5-MeO from here on out, and that's all I'm ever going to do, and it's ever I'm going to talk about. And again, I give the mistaken impression that that's me because I've spent so much time talking and writing about 5-MeO, because I do think it's very particular. It's very special. Okay, so I'll share, when I was a little kid, okay, I grew up in a completely non-religious, non-spiritual, secular household. And I was just one of these kids who was always curious, like, well, what really is real? And there was at one point where, you know, based on what I saw off of TV, like, this is how you're supposed to do it. I kneeled down next to my bed and I put my hands up, you know, in prayer position, and I bowed my head down and I'm like, God, I just want you to know that I'm just not into blind faith at all, that I'm not going to just believe in you. But if you're real, I'm going to need some solid proof. I just want you to know that I'm not going to accept anything less. And in a sense, that's what my first full 5-MeO DMT experience was like this confrontation. Was like, oh my God, this thing called God is real. Not what the religions say, but that there really is one universal consciousness that is everyone and everything. And it's made out of unconditional love. And that I was that. That is my true nature. So from that point on, I started saying, look, I don't believe in God because everything is God. So I don't have to believe in that because it just is everything. I do think that it has that power of conviction, and that it comes with so much power. I mean, there's so much energy in there. And for a lot of people, it's sort of the first time that they get to embrace that level of empowerment within themselves. And so again, it can be conflated with the ego that, oh, I am this infinite raging energy and I'm going to be that all the time or whatever. So I do think that it has potential to be problematic, but I also look at it as extraordinarily special because it has these same principles within it that, like for me, it didn't end my process of transformation. It actually began a whole new level of transformation. But in terms of whatever it was I had been looking for in my life, I felt at that point I had found it in an important sense. Even with all my prior psychedelic experience, which mainly before then was mushrooms and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of Salvia divinorum, which never presented me with like, oh, that's it. Salvia divinorum was always like, that was so fucking weird and that was so much fun. I can't wait to do that again. But I have no idea what to say about that other than that it's just like really, really strange, you know? Whereas with 5-MeO, it's like, oh shit, that was God. Oh my God, this thing's real, you know? So for that for me was like a transformative experience.
Yeah, I can imagine, mate. Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, for me, a lot of, you know, I think what was coming there is, you know, these kind of feelings of, you know, like the sacred and sort of the divine. And I wasn't looking for those experiences. I had no idea those experiences were available, even in, you know, through my sort of my teenage years of recreational use. And then at the point when one of those experiences sort of happened to me, I think, again, this was probably late 20s, early 30s. So I'd had a good many, you know, a good decade or so under my belt of psychedelic experiences. And I was a hardcore militant atheist. I was like, fuck this woo-woo bullshit, you know, I know what drugs is, I know this. And then suddenly I had one of these, sort of like, you know, experiences of the divine. And it wasn't on 5-MeO. I can't remember what I was on at the time, and I was like, it just shook me to my core. I was like, oh my God, what is this? Like, no, I've got to change my kind of belief system pretty quickly. And I would still actually describe myself as an atheist just because it's easier. Because like you say, I mean, I don't put, like, my belief is not in the sort of the texts that are written, although I've got a lot of respect for the texts as narratives, as mythology. You know, and I don't have a lot of respect for the institutions around them. So it's just easy just to say I'm an atheist. But for sure, I've sort of come to believe in something, the universal consciousness, God, whatever you call it, that there is some kind of all-pervasive sort of energy field of which we were it and we are it and we will be it, and we are having this kind of human experience. And I guess in that way, like, I'm kind of, my focus is just on this experience. I kind of figure that I'm here for some reason, that whether I chose to have this experience or whether the universe deemed me to have it. so that whatever I get up to within the psychedelic space, I'm always going to bring it back to here. Because what happens next is going to happen anyway, or what's already happening in parallel in multiple dimension multiverses, blah, blah, blah. That's all happening anyway. So I don't need to kind of spend, 6 months staring at the wall, sort of like admiring the sort of the intricacies of the the wallpaper, or sort of, cutting myself off from humanity so I can sort of, dive deeper into this kind of, the experience of sort of, of meanness. Like I want to sort of embrace it. I want to get out. I want to, use these experiences to inspire joy and love and sort of connection, and sort of, make this a better kind of experience. And I think a lot of people, I think, I would say, in my opinion, missed the point there. I think I would say that it's this is why I feel like people can get too lost in these experiences, and that's, I think, it's that stuff's going to happen anyway. There's plenty of time for that in whatever afterlife is going to happen, or it's probably already happening. Just make the most of this, of the absurdity of this of this monkey suit, and so that's how I tend to sort of ground myself from all these experiences, and but at 5MU included. But I don't think there's any denying the absolute sort of the way that experience cuts through. It's so unique in what it does. And I think the way you described it in the new book is very, very on point. So as I mentioned, I'm looking forward to reading the full thing.
Yeah, and something that I like to advise people against is too much meaning making, and that kind of goes back into the narrative and the story and things like that about, okay, well, what does this mean? What does this mean for me? What am I supposed to do? And I do like to go back to, just as you're saying, it's like, well, look, live your life the best you can. Like, make the most out of it, and hopefully have some fun, and really find a place where you want to apply yourself, and then pour yourself into that as much as you can, just like you've done with Adeptus Psychonautica. I wanted to ask you actually about that. Where'd you come up with the name?
Yeah, it's a kind of like pseudo pig Latin, and I actually got it from there's a series of like board games and like fantasy board games that I used to play when I was a teenager. It's like the little miniatures, like people paint these like little miniatures for wargaming. I was big into that when I was a teenager. And within the kind of the lore of that universe, it's kind of set in like the far distant future. There's all these different kind of schools of specialization. So there's like it's a bit similar to kind of like Dune in that regard. So there's and each school is kind of is named Adeptus something, and so then Adeptus meaning an initiate into, and then whatever thing. So there's like the Adeptus Astronomicon, which is the school of sort of space navigation, or the Adeptus Astartes, like the sort of the school of combat. And so it was always like the initiates into the school of something. So when I came to naming the channel, and I think, okay, well, what obviously, first of all, I wanted something that would kind of stand out a little bit, but also something that kind of tied into my own kind of personal history. And so I figured, okay, well, if there ever was the kind of the school of psychedelics, using this kind of pig Latin, it would be like sort of Psychonautica. So that I consider myself like an initiate into, not the master of, but an initiate into the school of psychonautics. So that's where I came up with the name from.
And I've noticed, like with that video you shared with me where you were kind of going through that introduction that I wrote and kind of saying, well, what about this with DMT? That you're kind of in this psychedelic RV sort of setup, and you've got all the graphics and all of that. And I know you're wearing sort of your icon right now on your T-shirt. So you've developed like a whole iconography and a whole look. I'm just curious how that kind of came about for you. And I'm asking as someone who is really just focused on audio podcasts, and like sometimes people are like, why don't you ever put it up on YouTube? And it's like, I haven't gotten there, but you've developed this sort of in concert with the YouTube look and all that. So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how that developed in your own kind of look and iconography and style.
Yeah, sure. So I've always been interested in the video editing style things. I actually went to film school. After I left normal school, I went to film school and I studied sort of production and sort of video editing. So And I used to do YouTube many years ago. I had like a video game channel sort of back when YouTube first started, and then I had kids and just had no more time for that. So I put the video game channel on the back burner and just forgot all about it. So I actually really enjoy the editing process, and I see it as the perfect sort of chance to sort of really sort of be able to make a point and sort of drive it home. You know, it's one thing to be able to sort of talk, and to be able to talk very fluidly and sort of and make a point. But I think there's so much fun and creativity you can have to really sort of like frame things in either a funny way or a silly way, or and it's just a lot of it's just purely for my own entertainment as to how to do this. And that was kind of a lot of what came with the RV idea. I just had this. I made a video. It was about over a year ago now, and it was almost like basically like a music video, and it was a DMT trip, and it was titled something like DMT Cosmic Absurdity, and the kind of the storyline was roughly sort of me in my bedroom. I smoked some DMT. I'm just transported into this kind of camper van traveling through the universe, and like different stuff would just be appearing at the windows, and I'm just like, what the fuck is going on here? And it was just a pure chance for me just to sort of be really sort of just silly, just let my creative juices flow. And afterwards, I kind of figured like, yeah, this is kind of what I'm doing. I'm, it's making commentary on psychedelic culture from this place, this camper van, this cosmic camper van traveling through, and things kind of, as I talk about things, they kind of appear at the window or appear on the TV. And I've got one where Terence McKenna's the chauffeur, sort of he's driving me through this. He keeps colliding with like space cats and stuff like that. So it's just a kind of a chance to be silly, and sort of obviously it does kind of set me apart, I think, from a lot of people who sort of take it a bit more seriously. But it allows. I think it allows for dissection of a lot of the kind of some of these topics, because it's some of them are kind of a bit silly, and so it's kind of there is a kind of, what's a good way of phrasing this? It's kind of appropriate to sort of talk about them in like such a kind of like an absurd way, in like it's an absurd setting, this camper van, and it's and I'm being very blunt or crude or glib or whatever, and it's just I don't know, it's just become part of my kind of style. And I think I don't know how much you kind of want to go into this, but I actually, and I don't think I actually used the camper van system in that one. But when it did come to the symposium video from last year, from about this time last year, the one where I was kind of just deconstructing all the kind of arguments, then I think that kind of style that I had there with the kind of the editing, the sort of being able to sort of chop things up and mix the clips and stuff, it really. It's just very effective at being able to cut through that kind of bullshit. Whereas to just purely just talk through something, you have to do a lot of sort of talking and stuff. Whereas I think with a bit of editing stuff, you can make the point in a lot more concise and possibly like entertaining way. So I love that part of it. The editing is probably my favorite part. All the rest of it is just kind of the stuff I need to do to get to the editing goal, the video stuff. But it does. I do tend to think when I'm making a video, I'm always thinking in terms of the finished edited product. So I kind of film things around that. So I've just kind of made a recent video of me talking to myself. It was titled something like "What would it be like if DMT was a conversation between two people?" So it's two people, like one who's like dressed in a suit, like having like an ordinary day at the office. And then one who's just got dooley boppers on, and he's like, it's runes painted across. I've got like eyeliner on it. I was like, I really pushed the boat out in terms of makeup and stuff. And I had to plan how to have these kind of two conversations with myself and then stitch it together. I was actually quite pleased with that one. But those kind of ones where I'm kind of being more creative, those are absolutely my favorite kind of things to make. but yeah, sometimes they're also the most time consuming to make. And sometimes I think, what am I doing? I just spent 3 weeks making this video with dooley boppers on my head. So, but yeah, I think that the camper van thing, it's one of a few different sort of sets I use. I've got ones where I'm sort of dealing with more serious topics where I think the camper van wouldn't be appropriate, and I think that's what I ended up using for the symposium video. I thought, it would be maybe it wouldn't have driven my points home as much if it was like sort of floating through space. But yeah, I think that's where the sets and the name came from.
Yeah, well, it's fun that you're willing to have fun with it and have a good time and create something creative, that, I kind of go back and forth between serious and absurd myself. Not so much in videos, but, just trying to be playful in some ways.
Yeah.
Because I am a serious guy, but I think I'm a fairly good-natured person, and I hope that comes across in my work. And I enjoy people. I enjoy people who do things that can be like seriously absurd and who are willing to have fun. Again, kind of going back to a point we were talking about earlier, that a lot of people in the psychedelic culture seem to be a little bit overly serious in my opinion. And I do think that there's a lot of room for absurdity. But at this point,
isn't that one of the first things that comes through, though? I mean, I can never understand it, because that was one of like the very first lessons that were just revealed to me. Even as a teenager taking LSD, just rolling around on the floor, laughing, like just belly absolutely aching, side splitting, just at the ridiculousness of me. I think there's one thing that we forget like really easily in psychedelic culture, and it blows my mind. Why? Because it reminds me every time, like, this is ridiculous. Like, that there's like you are ridiculous. This what you have built up around yourself is just, don't take yourself too seriously. There is so much kind of, much more fun and joy to it if you can just strip away some of your own bullshit. And that's, and that doesn't mean that it's all sort of, it's all flippant, or we should laugh at everything. There's plenty of room for that, the serious and the sacred and the divine and the healing. But I think that aspect, it does get overlooked, and it does get sort of like frowned upon. And like I mentioned at the beginning, like, there's a night of just pure joy and being able to sort of recognize, just how lost you might have become in your own just stupid bullshit. That is spiritual, in my opinion. That sort of recentering yourself and just finding that love in life. That is one of the most spiritual activities in the world. And it's weird, because you do get this in sort of, I've had this on like ayahuasca retreats where, you get to, some point in the middle of the night, and people have done the salt purge, and then someone just bursts out laughing, and then the room just bursts out laughing, and the whole room's laughing. And it's like, yeah, there we go, guys. This is part of it. This is just as much part of the spiritual experience. Like, don't forget this. Don't get so far up your own bums that it's, everything's got to be, smoke on the head and sort of agua florida and all this. There's plenty of joy and fun in there too.
Yeah, it just reminds me of a few things that I wrote back in 2009, that I really went through this very profound transformative process in 2008 and 2009. And then the first articulation and statement I made after that was my book, Being Human. And it's this short little book, but at the very end, I write, this is my list of entheogenic affirmations, and I say, I'd like to end with a few entheogenic affirmations to help remind you to keep it real. They're meant to be fun and a little whimsical. Spirituality is so often presented with such earnestness that the absurdity of reality gets overlooked. Ego takes everything so seriously. Life is serious, but it's also the most ridiculous game ever, and a great deal of fun too. So whenever your ego steps in and starts getting all dramatic and serious on you, give it a little reminder with one of these entheogenic affirmations or ones of your own creation. So I've got like, guess what? You are God. Now get over it. And you are God's altered state. And God doesn't take you seriously, so why should you? And your sense of humor is divine. And that one I really like because, kind of thinking about, well, all of our human attributes come from this universal consciousness. So anything that we have, it has more of. And so our sense of play, our sense of absurdity, that actually this is built into the very fabric of being. And I think the more that we can kind of embrace that and also acknowledge it at the same time without being too serious about it. And again, that's kind of where I hold out Terence McKenna, as he got the absurd part perfectly right. And he got the whole cosmic joke perfectly right. But then he turned into this super serious, so it's all about 2012 and the UFOs are coming and it's the end of history. So, okay, that's where you lost it. And so that's why I always hope to bring a little bit back more of into the conversations, that there is absurdity. And I have enjoyed your own videos and your sense of play that you articulate there. And then also, I appreciate that you're willing to step into serious topics and really talk about, what the fuck is really going on here, and be that voice. And it's interesting that it seems, I'm not following your numbers, but it seems that you've gone through something of an ascendancy of your own voice within the psychedelic world. Do you feel that, is that accurate? Are you gaining more attention?
I don't know. It's kind of, it's hard to gauge. I mean, my channel has kind of like increased sort of gradually. It's fairly steadily. There's occasional spike, but it's certainly, I'm not a full-time YouTuber. I'll put it that way, and I don't think it's ever going to get to a point where I will be. Although I'm certainly, if the opportunity is presented, I don't mind. But I'm just, in terms of it being able to be my income, it's firmly a hobby, and I like it being a hobby because then it gives me the space to not take it so seriously. I think it would be the moment where I had my income and my finances, my family finances all around it. I think it would be a lot less fun. In terms of like my voice going out there, I do get sort of people contact me, like I've had people contact me about journalists, about articles, whether it's been around some of the sort of the people I've been critical about, and I've been, like this, getting invited to be to feature on somebody else's podcast is a huge exciting thing for me. I'm still whenever I get a mail in my sort of Adeptus Psychonautica inbox, it's like, oh, come and be on my podcast. I'm like, oh, brilliant. So I was stoked, Martin, when you sort of said, come on podcast. Like, for sure, let's do this. I'll the chance to talk to a sort of a fellow sort of traveler is just amazing. And the idea that anybody at all wants to talk to me, it blows my mind. But yeah, I certainly, I think in the grand scheme of, psychonaut people out there on YouTube, there's certainly like people sort of much bigger than me. And I think I am, I think my space is fairly niche because it does kind of require you to not be firmly entrenched in one of these camps. And, the sort of the camps would be sort of like, this is just drugs. It's all in your brain. There's nothing else interesting going on here. To no, this is entirely God. There is nothing else. This is none of you are real. Blah blah blah. Through to the kind of the traditional people. There's all these kind of camps all over the place, and I'm kind of I am straddling this middle ground, and I mean this is part of the reason why I felt like I had to message you when I put out that recent video talking about your book. And I know that you wouldn't sort of fall into this trap, but I was imagining people sort of messaging you like, oh, Rob's turned on you now, Rob, because people are so binary that this idea that nobody can, I won't even go as far to call it disagree, but just nobody can have an input onto somebody else, like engage even with somebody else's work without it being seen as trying to start some kind of beef or like a fuck you to this. So I thought I'd just jump the gun here just in case, because it's kind of easy to be on the receiving end of things like that, and just think, oh God, Rob's just done this just to sort of try and stir up some controversy. And so I thought, right, Martin's a good guy. I'll sort of let him know what I'm up to, and I'm sure he'll take it in the spirit of what it was intended, which was an engagement with somebody's ideas. And a lot of what I do is that it's just purely engaging with ideas. Now, granted, I do it in a very sort of blunt, slightly crude, slightly sweary way. That's just what I do. But I think it's better to engage with the discourse. I think that's like the compliment that I can give as one kind of creator to another. It's like, hey, I've listened to your podcast, I've read your book, I've watched your video, whatever the medium is. I've engaged with it, and here's what I think. It inspired me. Here's what I want to throw into the sort of the conversation, and that people can get so pissy about that. Again, it just kind of highlights this binary nature, and I've got really little time for that. So I think in order to my niche, it is the people who are willing to sort of do that with me. And yeah, I think if in a numbers game, I'm just going to lose out to the people who just want to, I think it's a lot easier just to take on one of these kind of worldviews, which I can fully appreciate as like an ex-atheist or whatever. You can take the sort of the dogma and the sort of the pre-programmed responses, and you think you've got it all sorted, and it takes a lot to sort of chink through the armor there sometimes. But if for the people who are willing to sort of like, okay, there's something here that's worth having. There's something here that's worth having, and let's not take all of it. Let's not treat any of it like some kind of sacred cows where it's just none of it's infallible. There's some awesome bits about shamanism, and there's some bits about shamanism which are not so great, and there's some awesome bits about sort of let's say 5ME or whatever, and there's some stuff there we want to talk about, and this goes across sort of everything, and then you just get seen as a kind of offence sitter. So yeah, I don't know what kind of ceiling is on my thing, but in a way, I'm kind of glad of that, because that ability for me to treat what I do on YouTube as a hobby is what's kept me doing it for like the last I think it's like 3 years I've been doing the channel now. And it just kind of keeps it fun that I'm and again, it sounds a little bit flippant, but I am making that stuff for me. This is people kind of come to saying, you're doing harm reduction, or you should be like a shaman or whatever like that, and I'm like, thank you for saying that, but that's not me. I'm just talking about my own journey, my own experience. I'm not trying to tell anyone how it is. I've got no idea how it is. I've got my own ideas, but like I'm not going to ram it into somebody's throat as like a kind of a mythology, an ideology. So yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, maybe check back with me 2 years and maybe it's blown up, and maybe my ego will be completely messed. But at the moment, I'm just kind of enjoying the blundering. That was actually something that I've liked this word blundering, and I actually got that from Symposia. And I think they sort of said I was like blundering through this. I thought, you dead right, I'm blundering through it. That's exactly what I'm doing. So yeah, I think that's one good thing that came out of that whole episode.
Well, I've had you on for quite a while, and I know it's late on your end, but since you've mentioned it, and we're roughly the same age, I'm a few years older than you, but I just wanted to ask you, how is your relationship to all of this with your parenting? What do you reveal with your kids, and how old are your kids at this point?
Yeah, so my kids are 12 and 14. So my daughter's about to turn 15 shortly. And the way we kind of, well, first of all, we didn't really hide anything. Now, that's not to say that we told them everything, but we didn't hide anything. Now, that was sort of a lot easier when they were younger, when they go into bed at a certain time, and then the grown-ups are free to do what the grown-ups are free to do. But then certainly when it came to things like where I was traveling away to go to Peru and stuff like that, then at that point they became aware that I was doing something, and there was a certain gravity around it when I sort of came back and things like that. So I sort of told them. I told them I was going to Peru, and I told them I was drinking some medicine that sort of makes you sort of see things. And and they've said, well, why do you need to do that? And I said, well, sometimes Daddy has, some sadness, and I'm trying to sort of work through it. I'm trying to be the best version of me I can be, for you guys, for your mom, and they kind of understood that at that age. So this is when they were sort of, like sort of 9 or 10, and a bit younger. And so, and then as they've sort of gotten older, I've kind of told them as much as I want, because I don't want this to be a secret. I don't want any of it to be a dirty secret. They know about the YouTube channel. They're absolutely not interested in it. In fact, it's actually worked incredibly well in my favor, because, like sort of true kids, they just reject everything their parents are into as completely uncool. So this drugs thing is just completely square. Like, oh my God, parents are goddamn hippies. I reject it outright, and I'm like, parenting complete. So that's worked out pretty well for me. But now my daughter is coming to a point where she's sort of becoming interested, and certainly you hit a point in high school where things start floating around your sort of social circles, and she's becoming curious. And we kind of, this is something that me and my wife Rachel, we're sort of working out how we balance this. So we've not had to make any kind of tough decisions, but we kind of work out, well, what do we do here in these situations? Because obviously I don't ever want to be my daughter's drug dealer, and I don't want to sort of, I don't want to push my own sort of like biases onto her. Like, if she's going to find her own way with these things, and she's going to find her own way with things, and that's kind of fine, and I'll, happy to sort of like support her through it. But in that way, it's a kind of bit of, also the other thing is I don't want to be a complete hypocrite either, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this, like, my life was transformed utterly by my experiences. Now, again, do I want my kids having those experiences at the same time that I had them? Well, the parent in me says no, but I'm kind of worrying of being a massive hypocrite here. So it's something I'm aware that I'm a territory I'm getting into. I'll put it that way. I think I'm going to at some point be faced with my daughter being high, being high at some point, because she's very curious. Like, her friends are smoking weed, and she's very curious around that. So if she's not already done it, to be honest, which I wouldn't be surprised with. And I just hope that and I've certainly communicated this to them, that when this happened, I've told them that this is me and your mum, we've done these things by around this kind of time in your life. If you can do it, you can always come home. We're not going to be angry, if you want, because this is the kind of important, because I couldn't go home. There was if my parents had caught me high, then it was better for me to spend a night sleeping on a cold bench in the park than to than to deal with that. So it's just just to try and be honest about them, provide a sort of a home where they feel they can talk about them. We do talk about these things a lot. My daughter's very sort of open about her curiosity, which is I see as a gift, to be honest, that she can come and tell us about that these things are going around, and that would she mind if we tried? Would we mind if she tried them? That's basically where we're up to with it so far. Do I see myself on ayahuasca retreats with my teenage kids? Probably not at the moment. Although I would welcome the principle, especially if it was done within such a kind of like a controlled framework way, compared to sort of like just getting high in the living room or something like that. But mate, I think it's one of those bridges. I think I'm on the verge of crossing, but not quite crossed yet.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's always interesting to talk to someone, relatively the same age. Kids are relatively the same age, and hear how you're navigating that. And I really like the emphasizing of not hiding it, not trying to keep it secret, but also not like you're pushing it on them in any way, or like this is what
Yeah,
you've got to do.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Rob. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've enjoyed all the conversations that we've had, and I'm happy that the universe has brought us together in various ways. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that recent video that you made, because I had been thinking of like asking you on the show, but I wasn't sure what our topic was going to be. But then you made that little video in response to the little preview that I posted on Facebook. It's like, okay, well, this is perfect. So Rob just contacted me, so let's get him on the show. Perfect timing.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it works out great. And yeah, and likewise, I've really enjoyed talking to me. I mean, I've enjoyed all our conversations, and yeah. So, like I say, it's a real treat for me to be invited on someone, especially someone who's like his work. I've got a lot of respect for, Martin. So, yeah, I'd say thank you for all the stuff that you do. I'll mention again, I'm looking forward to the new book. I hope it will. Inspire many more conversations between us. And yeah, I will happily have another chat like this anytime, mate.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Rob.